Hi guys, welcome to this post-fight analysis of UFC 241. I'm mainly going to talk about the main card and of that the last three fights because I think these are the most interesting to talk about. Not that there's anything wrong with the previous ones, but just I like to focus on what I find interesting. So that's what you get. So first, Paulo Costa against Yoel Romero, great fight. It was the thing that everybody expected. It was a big brawl. It was fun to watch. They were just going at each other the entire fight, more or less. So that was a lot of fun to watch, and I think most people enjoyed it. I'm going to talk about the result at the end, but overall, great fight. I was surprised to see that Yoel didn't really use his wrestling all that much. Now, I don't know why. He's a great wrestler, obviously. I mean, look at his pedigree in Olympic wrestling. He didn't really show much of it, other than the occasional takedown. That was great. That worked fine. But he ran into something that I think several people have seen before, is that Paulo, you can take him down, but you're going to have a hard time keeping him there. And that is something that maybe Yoel was expecting that. So maybe it was a more of a tactical choice for Yoel to not waste too much energy going for the takedown and driving into Paulo the whole time to get that takedown in fear of emptying out his gas tank, which is something I'll get back to as well. So that was the first thing. We've seen Yoel do crazy stuff just with one hand grabbing the lead leg of a guy and flipping him up in the air for the takedown. So I mean, he can do really amazing takedowns. I think this was maybe a mistake on his part. I think if he had shot in maybe once or twice more per round than he actually did, it would have went differently. But you never know. So that said, a couple of points. First point is that the first knockdown was clean. So when you watch it, Paulo catches you really well with that left hand, and it's just perfectly placed. You see the chin wobble, and it's a flash knockdown. So Yoel goes down, and he's not out, but it's flash knockdown, so it's very clean. There's no disputing that. Now, as expected, Paulo goes after him, and a few seconds later, it looks like he's going down. Now, I will disagree with that. A lot of people said that it's a double knockdown. I disagree. If you watch it in slow motion, you'll see that it's clearly a loss of balance because Yoel's punch doesn't really connect. At best, it's a glancing blow off the shoulder, maybe a little bit of the throat, but it doesn't really connect. And Paulo's leaning back from it, and it's just, in my opinion, off balance. So I wouldn't count that as a knockdown. Maybe some people did, I didn't. Now, that brings me to a couple of things about Yoel, which we have to give him credit for. He's a master at several things, but I want to point two things out. And the first one is that everybody knows he's explosive. He's got this incredible explosivity that he can put into pretty much a punch, a jumping knee strike, a rush for a takedown, whatever you name it. He's explosive with it, and we know that he can do that at any time in a fight. Even if he's dead tired, we know that he can just all of a sudden just blitz at you with something that you don't expect because you think he's too wasted, and then he gets you, nails you, knocks you out. He's proven that time and time again. So what he's been doing more and more as he's getting older, again 42, so he doesn't have an unlimited gas tank. He threatens with explosivity and weird movements that seem to set something up and there's nothing going on. He did this bizarre kind of spinning, nothing really. He spun around and it looked like maybe a spinning back fist or something, but then nothing happens. And or he launches his leg towards Paulo and then just uses it to get past him off to the side at an angle and then just reset and takes his time. And he does it in a way that it looks like it's going to be very explosive. And then he immediately relaxes into whatever he's doing and lets inertia take over and carry his momentum towards where he wants to go. Now, what that does, the result is two things. So first off, most people back off then, and you can see Paulo Costa doing the same thing. He would back off, or he would go into his classic shell or double arm guard, which we'll also mention. Um, And what that does is then Yoel just stole a couple more seconds from the fight that he can use to manage the pace and make sure that he doesn't run out of gas if you put too high a pace on him. Because he knows, he's been doing that in his last few fights. He knows he doesn't have a limitless gas tank. He's very aware of his age. As you can see in the way he fights, he's still a physical specimen. I mean, I'm sure he outtrains most guys half his age, but still at the elite level, age does play. It is a factor. So that's the first thing. And then related to that, he's really good at pretending to be tired. Now, again, after the first round, when you watch the crazy intensity of that round, and Paulo was coming after him with pretty much everything he had, that was a really high pace. Um, I'm sure, like I said, that Joel is in great shape, but having a heavy hitter like Paulo Costa just pressuring you constantly, and you have to make sure that you don't get knocked out. That takes a lot of energy. Even if you're just shelling up, defending, blocking, trying to get out the way, it creates a lot of intensity, and it's very tiring. And I thought that that was what you saw as of round two, is that he looked tired. You will look tired. Now, um, given as that we know that he can still hit you with that amazingly explosive shot, and given that Yoel was still going on the offensive, he was still very active. The trick for the opponent is to figure out, well, how tired is he actually? Is he faking it? Is he really tired? My opinion, it looked like a combination of the two. I think he is tired, but he overacts, keeping his mouth open, sticking out his tongue, wobbling around a little bit every now and then. Looks like he takes a breather and so on, and then suddenly he just comes at you. So I think he acts it up a little bit to kind of lure people into doing something stupid, or just overcommit to whatever they're doing. But I think he also knows that he's facing guys who understand that he's doing that and are more careful. And that was what Paul did really great. He didn't fall for that trap. He kept being very careful. He kept trying to step in with techniques and so on. And he didn't fall for that trick. You don't want to get lured into just coming at Yoel Romero without any sort of defense, even if it's a limited one like the one Paulo Costa has. So that was what I think what we mainly saw in the fight. It's well done by Romero. It's a veteran move. It's somebody who knows the fight game very well. He knows his own body very well, who understands how to pace 3 rounds of a fight, who doesn't put everything in the first round, which is a little bit what Paulo Costa did. It's the first time he went, I think, the distance, Paulo. So there was a little bit of doubt about his gas tank. Would he be able to last? Well, he got tired, clearly, but he lasted until the end of the fight. He did well. So there's that. I'm going to give him some grief over the lack of defense. Pretty much the only thing Paulo Costa does is shell up or put a double arm guard up, well, however you want to call it, and just take shots. Now, as you saw in the fight, that doesn't always work well. Yoel managed to hit him with a bunch of shots, namely the uppercut that worked well, and it landed a few more than once very cleanly. So the thing is that the double arm guard, it's fine, it works, but it's very limited. It works better when you go to Muay Thai, kickboxing, and so on, because they have big gloves. It doesn't work as well with the small MMA gloves. I understand the reason for it, and I teach it as well, but I teach it as not the only defense or the preferred defense. Paulo Costa has been using this as his preferred defense to basically tank through whatever the opponent throws at him and then get in his heavy shots. Again, everybody knows he hits hard. He hits insanely hard. He doesn't hold back. Pretty much every shot is a power shot. It's gotten better, but still, I mean, the guy hits hard. And a guy like Romero knows that he shouldn't just stand there and trade. So Paulo, what I wanted to say is that he knows that he has this power. He knows the opponent knows it. So he just tanks through everything. Comes forward, braces for impact, and then just keeps going. It's fine up until a certain point. And he is now fighting the caliber of opponents who can handle that kind of thing. which is what we saw Romero, who, as of the second round and also the third one, started being a lot more cleverer and using his kind of like boxing skills a little bit better. I'll talk about that a little bit. But Paulo didn't change his defense on that. There was a little bit of head movement, but not all that much. So I believe that once he gets more comfortable with different styles of defending against strikes, different types of defensive techniques, as opposed to just covering up, I think he's gonna end up being even more terrifying to watch because he'll be able to counter people to slip punches and use that as a counter. Um, and so on. So there's a lot more I think that he can do. He's still young, he's got plenty of time, but it needs to happen now. I think he's 28, so he needs to make those adjustments now, and then he can move on to, in my opinion, become the champ. So that brings us to the end of the fight. There was a lot of controversy about, a lot of people said that Yoel should have won. I think it could have gone either way. Now, I personally would have given it to Yoel, but I think that you have to look at one of the criteria for scoring is pretty much the primary criterion is significant strikes. Now, if you were to put them all together, you would see that yes, Yoel did throw more in the later rounds, but many of those techniques were not significant. And we have to be honest here. I'm not saying all, I'm saying many of those were just arm punches, throwing away the jab, pawing with the jab, flicking out the jab, but there wasn't really devastating power in those punches. So I would say that there's an argument to be made that those were not significant strikes and therefore they weren't counted to determine who won those rounds. Whereas whenever Paulo did something, it was clear that there was enough power in there. It was significant. I think a lot of Yoel's strikes didn't land, were either blocked, missed, or Paulo just barely got out of the way. So I can understand why they gave it to Paulo Costa, but personally, again, I think it could go either way. It's sad to see for Yoel because I think the guy would have deserved to go all the way up to a title shot at his age. I mean, he's not going to be around forever. Don't know what he plans on doing, but for sure, I think he would have deserved one. I think Paulo's time would have come either, as well. If he would have lost this fight, then maybe in a fight or two fights down the road, he would have gotten a title shot. He's clearly an up and coming fighter. So, as a fan of the sport, I would say that it should have gone to Yoel, but I can live with both decisions. So that's it for the first fight. Let's move on to the next one. I highly wanted to see that one. I was very much anticipating if this was going to be fun or not. Nate Diaz versus Anthony Pettis. Now, Nate looked a whole lot better than I thought he would after 3 years of not fighting. Last fight he did was against Conor McGregor, and that's 3 years ago, almost to the date, I think. So there was this very clear risk of a ring rust, meaning that he would be uncomfortable in the cage because he had been out of it for so long. But I was pleasantly surprised to see that that didn't seem to be too much of an issue. It was also much more offensive than I would have anticipated. And there's something that we can say for sure. Nate dominated against the fence, clearly, and on the ground. And it wasn't even close. There's no argument there. So skipping to the end, he deserved a victory in my opinion. Now, going on to Anthony Pettis, I have to caveat this with everything I say now about Pettis. You need to remember that he apparently broke his foot very early in the fight. So in the second round, you can clearly see him checking, for stability and seeming to shake it off a little bit when it hurts when he used that foot. So if you look it up, you can see that he posted a picture on social media of his broken foot. So, I mean, the guy was injured, right? So a lot of respect for hanging in there. And we have to take into account everything that he did in context of that injury, because otherwise it wouldn't be fair. If he would have done the same performance without the injury, then I think a lot more criticism would have been valid. Given that he broke his foot, I'm like, okay, let's put that into context. So let's say that I'm going to talk in general terms about what happened. Let's pretend that the fight didn't happen. I'll try to bring it back to things we've seen Anthony do in the past. Now, he doesn't fight well off the back foot. Against the pressure of a fighter like Nate, he has difficulty just setting things up. That is a key issue for him because you need to be able to withstand forward pressure in combat sports, in particular in MMA. So that means that you have to be able to produce your own forward pressure so you can stop the guy from just walking you down, as we saw in the fight. Now, against a high volume but low power, relatively speaking, low power striker like Nate Diaz, you need footwork, and you need quick footwork to, for instance, create a gap as Nate advances. So you scoot back real fast, and then you pause, you reset, and you immediately punish him as he walks into range, because you know he will walk into range. Nate did that constantly. So that is the first thing that you can do. The next thing is that you can do is you need to use penetrating power to physically stop him in his tracks. And then you follow up with whatever you have as far as techniques go. Once the advance is stopped and you literally break his rhythm, you break his advance, and he has to absorb that incoming impact. He can't just keep walking forward. And then you follow it up. Now the next thing is that the additional goal of that is that it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt on the way in for Nate, and that should make him more hesitant to come forward. And Anthony Pettis isn't able to do that. He doesn't have that kind of power. It's not his style. He's a great fighter, but that's not his style. Against Nate Diaz, he should have done that. Now, for the people who are screaming at the screen right now, look at Nate versus Rafael dos Anjos. Look what happened. It took him less than 2 minutes of kicking Nate Diaz in the legs to calm him down. And pretty much Nate was hurting, and it didn't feel like walking Rafael down. And he respected the power of dos Anjos. Now, Anthony, he doesn't have that power. He never had. He's a great fighter. He has a lot of really cool tricks. But in my opinion, he doesn't have the fundamentals to handle this kind of situation, even without the broken foot. So, clear win for Nate Diaz. I don't think there's anybody who will dispute that. If they do, well, I think they saw a different fight than the one I did, and via con Dios, good for you. However, what's the way forward? Well, what I see is that Anthony Pettis can be a gatekeeper, which is typically the guy, the veteran guy that the up and coming talents have to fight and get the pass, have to pass before they can move on to fighting the ranked contenders and so on, or just making their way up the ranks. I don't see him getting a title shot anytime soon. Same thing for Nate Diaz. Well, I mean, 3 years off, he seems less interested to fight than you'd assume of a professional fighter. So who knows? He did call out Masvidal at the end, but does he really want that fight? I don't know. He's got money. He's got a business outside of the octagon. So I have no idea if he's actually committed to continuing his career. He's also in his 30s, so he doesn't have 10 years left probably. So we'll see. I would love to see that fight against Masvidal. That would be an interesting fight. So that's it for this one, and then we get to the main event of the main card, and that's Stipe Miocic against Daniel Cormier for the heavyweight title. Again, clear winner, but I'm going to say some controversial stuff at the end. So again, put your drinks down, chill out, relax, and it'll be fine. But anyway, the first thing that I noticed is the lack of wrestling. So Daniel Cormier later on in the press conference, he admitted to it that was the game plan and he abandoned it. And his coaches were saying constantly to him, like, go for the wrestling, and he didn't. He chose to trade with Stipe, which is not a smart move, I guess. Here's the thing. We've seen Daniel Cormier do that in the past. We saw him do that against John Jones. He insisted on taking Jones down even when it was clear that it wasn't working. Because John Jones has really good takedown defense. And he wasted tons of energy just going for that takedown until he got it. Now, he did pretty much the same thing with Stipe in this fight. He wasted tons of energy trading with him, and by the fourth round, he was tired. And in that round, what we saw is that he stopped going after Stipe and was mostly defensive. And then Stipe started going after him, and there was nothing Daniel could do to stop him. That was clear. He was too tired. He made some mistakes and paid for it with by losing the fight that way. Now I did a separate video about why Stipe Miocic managed to knock out Daniel Cormier. I'll put a link in the show notes so you can watch that one. It's about 10 minutes long, but it goes into a lot more detail. I won't go into it here. Thing is that Cormier went to hand fighting one too many times. He always does the same thing. Yes, he can box and kick and so on. He kicks quite well actually, but in the beginning of the fight, so a couple of good leg kicks. Throughout the fight, there were a couple of high kicks actually that came out that almost nailed Stipe. So he can kick, he just doesn't use it much. He has this kind of plodding, workman-like style of going forward and always reaching out, bridging the gap or crossing the bridge, as we sometimes call it, reaching out, hand fighting, and then trying to either connect with a shot or work his way into a collar tie. And his preferred striking method is a collar tie and then uppercuts, hooks, and so on, just beating you up in a clinch like that. He's good at that. He's really good at that kind of dirty boxing, but it didn't really work well against Stipe. And Daniel should have seen that very early on instead of constantly going for that for 3 rounds straight and then tiring himself out in the process. And then at the end, when we go into the 4th round, when you see that Cormier becomes defensive because, in my opinion, he was too tired to keep going forward. He ate a lot of shots on the way. Don't forget that. I don't think Stipe handled the hand fighting really well, but he did make Daniel pay for it repeatedly throughout the previous rounds. So Daniel was tired, and then he went one too many times. He went for that kind of hand fighting position, and Stipe did the right thing. He went for that body shot, which he had set up perfectly, which Daniel had already been hurting from many, many times. And you saw it that it just takes a step back. And finally, I was like, dude, finally, Stipe immediately steps in and fires a 1-2, which is something he should have done way, way sooner. Again, I'll get back to how he handled that. And that was pretty much the end of it. So the 4th round, which is finally when we get to see Stipe's the skill level that he actually has, whereas in the first 3 rounds we didn't really see it. So again, I'll put a link to that video breaking down the knockout. Put that in the show in the description. I'm not going to keep on talking about that one. I will talk about something else. John Jones stated that Stipe is the greatest of all times when it comes to the heavyweights. Obviously, he hates Daniel Cormier, so it doesn't surprise me that he wants to just twist the knife a little bit more at the end. I've seen many people say that. I will disagree with that. Heresy. I know everybody gets upset. No. My opinion is that we haven't seen the GOAT in the heavyweight division yet. We've yet to see one. Go back to all the previous heavyweights. Going from Randy Couture, Frank Mir, and so on, all the heavyweights that we've seen in the past. Is Stipe a better wrestler than those guys? Is Stipe a better wrestler than DC? No, not by far. I don't think anybody will argue that point. As a striker, is he a superior striker? I don't think so. My contention is that we have yet to see a really good striker in the heavyweight division in MMA. Well, in the UFC at least. So why do I say that? Well, look at the lighter weight classes. Look at the guys like Conor McGregor, John Jones, guys like Edson Barboza, who have really good technique. You might disagree with certain things, how they do the techniques, but they consistently have a high technical level. And with that I mean the body mechanics, the footwork, defensively speaking, they're also good strikers, and so on. They have all that. Stipe doesn't have that. Now, for the people who think like, well, heavyweights are never that technical, I would say like go watch some old K1 videos in the heavyweight division, or go look at what a guy like Rico Verhoeven is doing right now in the heavyweight division outside of the UFC. And tell me again that a heavyweight cannot be technical. as complete and utter nonsense. It's perfectly possible, but for some reason, I don't know why, I have my suspicions. Too many heavyweights in MMA rely on power. Now, it is true that as a heavyweight, you always have that one punch knockout, just ready in the wings, waiting to come out, and you never know when you might actually land it. We when you look at the way that Stipe knocked out Fabricio Verdum, Verdum was did this the dumbest thing ever by just running forward chin first, and Stipe was actually still running backwards and threw that straight, more or less straight punch. It wasn't a clean power shot. He didn't plant and then go for it. He was pretty much still going backwards, and it knocked Verdum out. So we can't call that perfect striking. My point is that we don't see a lot of really great striking to begin with in the heavyweight division, because there is this really, you can throw a crappy punch going backwards and still knock somebody out if you're a heavyweight. Lightweights, not so much. You don't have the mass, you don't have the inertia that you can put into techniques. So to illustrate that point, remember the previous fight of Anthony Pettis against Wonderboy? He was losing that fight up until the last moment where he knocked Wonderboy out. But if that hadn't happened, and everybody can say that, well, it was a fluke. I wouldn't consider it a fluke, but it was a well-placed punch. It worked fine, deserved winner. But before that, he wasn't winning. Same thing, in my opinion, was going on here, though maybe less explicit as Wonderboy against Pettis. Stipe was losing the fight up to round 4. And sure, it was a little bit close, but I would say that Daniel was clearly winning those rounds. Now, that is one thing. So I would say that greatest of all times, if you're losing 3 of all of the 5 rounds already, he needed that knockout to win that fight, in my opinion. So that's one. Second, look at the way he fights. He's a very rigid fighter. He hardly moves his head, hardly any head movement. He was trading with DC constantly when DC was walking him down, and he often got the worst of that bargain. So, in my opinion, he didn't know how to solve that problem of DC reaching out for him and trying to do that hand fighting. But my point is that kind of thing, I mean, DC is going to do that. He's been doing it consistently for years. So it's not like this is an insurmountable problem that they couldn't prepare for in camp, and it didn't have a solution. There's plenty that I didn't see him use. Again, step back and reset. Very a quick step drag, double stop drag, step drag backwards, reset, and then launch something at DC as he steps forward, because he's going to. Or catch him with body kicks. You hardly see Stipe do any body kicks, despite him having the reach advantage over DC when it comes to range. He could have perfectly every time that, well, not every time, but many times when DC was reaching for him, he could have taken a quick step back and launched a body kick, or launched it as DC tried to step in. I think he threw one knee and it landed great and it backed DC up. But body kicks are perfect for that. I don't think Stipe has the technical expertise to really pull that off. Contrast that with Paulo Costa, who should have done it more, but did that against Joel Romero repeatedly. As Joel was moving towards Paulo's right side, he caught him several times with a right body kick. And I think it was only one time that Joel managed to catch it. And even then, it didn't do a lot with it. So that is something I never saw Stipe do. I don't think he has the dexterity, the leg dexterity to just pull that off. Again, I'll hold your horses. I'll caveat that at the end again. So that was something that he could have done. He also didn't create angles, except for the end in the 4th round. So that's also something he could have done against Daniel as he was reaching and advancing and walking him down. Just quickly create angles and then immediately try to counter before Daniel reorients. Stipe didn't do that. He only started doing those kind of things when he was in the 4th round. And that was only when DC was backing off and letting him attack. So what do we see from this fight? We see Stipe having a lot of difficulty fighting on the back foot and only taking the advantage in the fight when his opponent gets tired and needs a break from walking him down. And then Stipe did great. When he's going forward, he did great. He landed over a dozen body shots with the left hand. Did great, varied these with a high hook every now and then. And he stepped offline, used the angles and so on. So he did great as of the fourth round. But that was only because he could attack. And the only reason he could attack was not because of something he did, but was because of something DC did, backing off. And near the end of the fight, again, watch the video when I break down the knockout, but perfectly done. I mean, that was great and then deserved the winner. So if we're going to talk about greatest of all time, I think there are many issues with Stipe's fighting that I think a GOAT should not have. Now, this all depends on how you define greatest of all times. I have my own definition that I follow, and we can argue about that, but that is just my personal opinion. So, again, I wouldn't say it was a bad fight. I didn't think it was the best fight ever. It was an interesting fight just to see how it was going to end. I was afraid we were going to go for 5 rounds of what we saw in round 3, and both guys getting more and more tired and sloppy. But I was impressed to see how Stipe ended up finishing it like that. It was really well done. Should have done what he did in those last 10 seconds from the get-go. Anyway, before closing out, I respect every single fighter who has the balls to step into the octagon, because most people don't have the guts to do that. So when I'm critiquing somebody, it's not personal. It is just purely a technical discussion, looking at the positives and negatives. Obviously, I'm not saying I can do better, otherwise I wouldn't be sitting here. But the point is that it's not personal. It's just looking at how does the fighter do in certain conditions, what are the strong and the weak points of his fighting style, his technical abilities, and so on. And I think that's the most interesting part for me. I'm way too old to compete anyway, so I very much enjoy watching other guys fight and then see what kind of strategies they use, how do they implement them, what kind of techniques in regards to their previous fight, and so on. So that's what I find mostly fascinating right now when it comes to MMA. I don't really care who wins which title. I just want to see good fights. So that's pretty much where I come from. So again, Stipe's champ now. We'll see what happens. I'm sure there's all the other heavyweights who are going to want to come after him. I'm sure Ngannou will want another shot at a title. So we'll see what happens with that. DC, I think at this stage he should consider retiring. I think he's probably going to try and come back one more time and get the title back. I think because he's been talking about a legacy for a while now. So I don't think that's a great idea. Again, he's past 40 now, so we'll see what happens. Again, great fighter, nothing negative to say on that front, but I don't think it would be a great idea to keep going, in that direction of always trying to come back. I believe that once a fighter reaches a certain age, you have to be willing to hang up your gloves. Especially as DC said multiple times that he's got plenty of money, he's got money outside of the UFC, that's not the issue. So the only reason you do that is for glory and for your legacy. Okay, well, at that age there's the issue that you take damage that you might not recover from. He's had more than one knockout in his career now, DC, so maybe it's time to hang up the gloves. Nothing but respect for his career, but at this stage, I don't know. That's it, guys. If you have any questions or comments, go to the Facebook page and you can see a bunch of other stuff there. And other than that, hope you guys enjoy this. Make sure that you leave a comment. If you can share, that would be great. Subscribe if you can as well, and then we'll see what happens next when it comes to the upcoming fights and events. Thanks, take care.